As they left Marthel together, the Druid walked first, staff steady against the stone. The goblin followed, muttering to itself in half-formed complaints, its pace uneven but persistent. Oladris brought up the rear, light-footed, his gaze drifting not along the path but through it, as though the road were merely a suggestion. The city fell away in fragments, a tower lost to a bend, a wall swallowed by rock, then nothing at all. The mountain trail tightened quickly, carving itself into the slope like a deliberate wound. Pale stone gave way beneath their boots, sometimes wide enough to breathe, sometimes narrowing until the Druid felt the drop long before he dared glance at it. Wind cut across the path in sudden bursts, dry and sharp, carrying the scent of dying grasses and distant wings unwilling to follow them this high. The goblin refused to look down. They walked in silence until the climb forced a breath from thought. "You watch the road like it might change its mind," the Druid said at last, not turning. Oladris smiled faintly.
"It often does."
"What is that? Seer sight?" "It sounds like fairy tales for an elf to see into the future."
"Yes, but you men get us wrong. Normal sight waits for things to arrive. We watch and change what gathers before the arrival becomes inevitable."
The Druid adjusted his grip on the staff. "So you can see the future."
"I can feel when choices grow thin. When the spirit realm presses hard enough against the world to leave marks. I act when the pressure becomes unbearable."
"And the cost?" Oladris did not answer immediately. The wind rose between them, tugging at cloaks and hair.
"Balance. Always balance."
They climbed higher. The Druid spoke then of his own path, of training begun young, not to sharpen strength, but to temper belief. Of how every initiate of the Druidaine ended their years of study with a task given by the royal guard, not as punishment or test of might, but as a placement of trust. "I was sent because of my faith," the Druid said simply. "The gods still speak to those who listen." Oladris glanced at him, something like approval passing behind his eyes.
"Then they chose well."
The path descended at last. Stone softened into soil beneath their boots, and the wind thinned until it carried resin and cold earth. Sound changed here, swallowed quickly, footsteps dulled, voices pressed close. The trees seemed to be protecting them. Tall pines rose around them, straight and close-set, their bark dark with age. Light fractured through the canopy in narrow, drifting bands. The goblin fell silent without being told.
"The forest of talking trees," Oladris said.
The Druid nodded. So it was named when the Ents first walked. Oladris turned slightly.
"You know its history?"
"This forest once spoke plainly," the Druid said. "Its words we heard, and its warnings we took. The Ents guard the old crossings between spirit and soil. They'll always protect us, and we'll always protect them." As if in answer, a pine creaked, not from wind, but from settling. A long, deliberate sound. The forest was stretching itself awake. They walked deeper, and the Druid spoke of Alden. "He did not give me commands," he said quietly. "He showed me a vision." Oladris slowed. "A great army," the Druid continued, "raised across water, coming from a host of ships, and their leader wielding a spear strong enough to dissipate even Ents to the touch. Then finally our Druids halting their prayer in cowardice." Oladris stopped walking.
"In the Great War, the Dark King of the Druids wielded a demon spear. He used it to command spirits, to bind them into obedience. The spirit realm bent and rotted. Only intervention by Alden mid-battle gave us the power to overcome it."
He looked toward the trees, then back to the Druid.
"What you saw aligns with what I felt in Marthel. My fallen brother does not seek destruction, he seeks command. He believes balance can be enforced. I fear he's already blind to the mistakes of the past."
"And the river?" the Druid asked.
"The river was once the heart of Druidaine. Political, spiritual. If the spirit realm crosses anywhere now, it will be there."
They made camp as dusk fell quickly beneath the pines. Firelight struggled to hold shape. Smoke sank lower than it should. The Druid performed a grounding rite before sleep. It held barely. The goblin slept early. In the night, it spoke, not plainly. Its voice wove soft and broken, a child's rhythm carrying words too old for comfort.
"Fields that fed now hunger bare. Lanterns dim where prayers were fair. Spirits flee the open door, hide from steps that hunt once more. Darkness learns the shape of night, names the stars, then eats the light. Even ghosts now learn to fear what walks unseen, yet always near.
The Druid slept through it. Auladris did not. Toward morning, as the fire burned low, the forest shifted. Roots settled. Branches stretched. The canopy sighed, not in memory, but in motion, easing itself awake after a long, uneasy slumber. The forest of talking trees was listening. The Druid woke as if dragged back into his body. Cold earth pressed against his cheek. Pine needles scratched at his neck where his collar had shifted in the night. His shoulder ached sharply, the kind of ache that came not from injury, but from sleeping poorly on ground that did not care whether he rested or not. For a long moment, he did not move. Above him, the canopy was a broken lattice of dark needles and pale sky. Morning had arrived without ceremony. No birds announced it. No wind stirred the branches. The forest breathed, but quietly, as if conserving itself. He rolled onto his back and exhaled slowly. Every joint protested. His staff lay where he had dropped it the night before, half buried in moss, the wood darkened by damp. The fire had died cleanly. No embers, no smoke, just a circle of flattened earth and ash pressed thin. They had not been meant to stay long. He sat up and reached for the satchel. Shawla's knot was still intact. The food inside was simple: dense bread, dried fruit, a small, wrapped parcel of something warm enough that it startled him when his fingers touched it. He ate slowly, methodically, feeling his body return to him piece by piece. The bread grounded him. The fruit brought a dull sweetness that cut through the resin-heavy air. Across the clearing, the goblin crouched on a fallen log, already chewing. It was hard to tell where its body ended and the satchel began. Both bulged and shifted as it fed. Bits of blue jam stained its chin again, though how it had found more was unclear.
Morning fell down funny.
It muttered through a mouthful.
Forest didn't ring. No bells. Just there.
The Druid did not answer. Auladris stood at the edge of the clearing, facing away from them. He had not slept. The Druid could see it in the way the elf's shoulders were set, in the stillness that came not from rest, but from vigilance prolonged past comfort. "Did you feel it?" the Druid asked. Auladris nodded once.
Yes.
They packed quickly. The forest did not resist them, but it did not welcome them either. The ground accepted their steps without sound. Moss swallowed footprints almost as soon as they were made. Light filtered down in narrow columns, illuminating nothing long enough to be trusted. They walked. At first, there was nothing wrong. Then, the Druid noticed the shapes. Not immediately, not clearly. Tall pines began to stand a little too straight. Their trunks seemed broader at the base than they should have been. Their upper limbs bent in ways that suggested posture rather than growth. From a distance, they looked like figures paused mid-stride, frozen in the act of becoming something else. When he focused on them, they were only trees. When he looked away, the sense returned.
Seen those before.
The goblin whispered suddenly, scampering up a nearby trunk with surprising speed.
Standing quiet. Don't like when you count them.
Auladris slowed. The forest had not changed in appearance, but it had shifted in attention. The Druid felt it in his chest, a pressure like weather building without clouds. Not hostility, not yet. Something closer to curiosity, heavy and impersonal.
This place remembers when it spoke.
Auladris said softly.
It no longer needs to.
They walked deeper. The goblin's words from the night returned, unbidden.
Fields that fed now hunger bare. Lanterns dim where prayers were fair.
The Druid felt a tightening behind his eyes. The poem had not frightened him when first heard. Now, with the forest leaning subtly inward, its meaning pressed harder. "You spoke more than you think," the Druid said at last. "You said more than fear." The goblin paused mid-step, claws scraping bark.
Didn't mean to say it, just words fall out when darkness starts to grow.
Auladris turned slightly.
Fields failing. That much is already true. I passed farms east of Marthal, where the grain rose too fast, then collapsed under its own weight. Too green, too eager.
He frowned.
If that is spreading west, then Frevara may be stirring.
Oladris finished quietly.
Or being answered when she should not be.
The Druid shook his head slowly. Not answered. Misheard. They stopped walking. The goblin wasn't speaking of crops alone. Lanterns dimming. Prayers failing. That is not soil. That is structure. That is warding. The runes in Marthal, old bindings, are failing or being overwritten. He looked back toward the east, though the city was long hidden by stone and trees. When runes fail, the world does not notice at first, only those who rely on them. The goblin tilted its head.
Lights go out before houses fall.
Oladris did not argue. Instead, he raised a hand, not in warning, but in acknowledgement. The air shifted. The Druid felt it then, a shadow moving through the forest, crude and impatient, like weight dragging against undergrowth. Orcs, not the disciplined hosts of Volcrim. These were feral things, scarred, half-starved, driven westward by something behind them rather than drawn by prey ahead. The first charge came without signal. A roar broke the stillness as two figures burst from the trees, axes raised. The Druid moved on instinct, staff snapping up to deflect the first blow, wood ringing sharply against iron. Oladris was already moving, blade flashing once, twice. Efficient, precise, without flourish. No spells were spoken. Steel bit, wood cracked, breath left bodies in choking gasps. The Druid pivoted, drove his staff into an orc's knee, felt bone give, then brought the haft down across its skull. Another lunged from the left. He caught its wrist, twisted, and sent the blade spinning uselessly into the undergrowth. Above them, something small shrieked. The goblin dropped from a branch onto an orc's back, pummeling its head with a stone far too large for its hands, cackling breathlessly.
Come on, Orcu.
Oladris moved like a shadow made solid, never overextending, never rushing. One orc fell with its throat opened cleanly. Another fled, howling, disappearing westward between the trees. The fight ended as abruptly as it began. Bodies lay still. The forest did not react. No birds returned. No wind stirred leaves. Even insects seemed to hold back. The Druid stood, chest heaving, and felt something colder than fear settle into him. They weren't hunting us, he said.
No, they were running.
The goblin slid down a trunk and wiped its hands on its hide.
Bad place behind him, worse than here.
They resumed walking. Gradually, the trees thinned. The oppressive closeness eased. Light broadened. Grass replaced needles underfoot. They emerged onto open land. Rolling fields stretched westward, green and alive. Stone farmhouses dotted the distance. Smoke rose gently from hearths. Villages lay scattered across the plains, orderly, unaware, beautiful. The Druid felt no relief. Behind them, the forest stood silent, not asleep, watching. And he understood then, not with certainty, but with dread, that even nature was beginning to turn away from Marthal, that the spirit realm was shifting faster than anyone had believed possible, that what followed would not arrive slowly or politely or on terms they could choose. The goblin squinted at the horizon.
Too quiet out here. Quiet's moving.
No one argued. They turned westward, toward the Rowan forest still unseen beyond the plains, and behind them, the forest of talking trees held its silence, keeping what it had seen. The forest did not end. It simply ceased to accompany them. One step beyond the last line of trees, and the world changed its posture. The air thinned, no longer held close by bark and leaf. Sound carried farther than it should have. Footfalls echoed faintly across the open land, unsoftened by root or moss. Behind them, the forest of talking trees stood, as it always had, dark, upright, patient, but it did not lean toward them anymore. The Druid felt it immediately. Not fear, absence. Ahead, the Tharwen plains opened wide. The river they followed bent lazily through the grasslands, its banks intact, its waters full. It flowed as rivers always had, obedient to slope and time, but where sunlight struck its surface, There was no answering brilliance. Light touched it and died there, swallowed without shimmer or song. The druid slowed, frowning, though he said nothing. The goblin waddled ahead, humming tunelessly to himself, sack bouncing against his side. He stopped abruptly, squinted at the water, then spat.
Used to dance. Now it just crawls.
He crouched, dipped 2 fingers toward the surface, then withdrew them without touching.
Rivers still flow.
He said, nodding to himself.
No care where it go.
The elf glanced down at him.
Rivers do not think.
The goblin snorted.
Everything looks through trees and valleys, and an elf wants it to have eyes.
They walked on. After a while, the druid glanced back. He would later struggle to explain what he thought he saw. Not movement exactly, not motion as men understood it, but the forest, just at its edge, appeared crowded. Trunks closer than before, shapes aligned where there had been space, as though the trees were standing together now, not in rows or chance clusters, but with intent. For a heartbeat, it looked as though the forest had gathered itself. He stopped. The others followed his gaze. The elf narrowed his eyes. The goblin turned fully around. Nothing. The forest stood still, silent, precisely as it always had. The goblin sniffed, scratched his chin, and grumbled.
Trees got meetings.
He squinted again, dissatisfied.
Didn't invite us. Places to be. Things to see.
He lingered a moment longer than the others, eyes fixed on the tree line.
Forests don't tell us. Not now.
Then he shook himself, forced a chuckle.
Old eyes. Seen worse.
The forest did not follow. They moved deeper into Tharwen, and the land began to show its omissions. The first sign was livestock. A wide pasture lay fenced and intact, the posts upright, the rails unbroken. Cattle wandered within it, alive and uninjured, their hides glossy, their eyes dull. Gates stood open. No blood marked the ground. No sign of panic lingered in the churned earth. The animals grazed listlessly, unbothered by the absence of hands that should have guided them. The goblin sucked his teeth.
Grubs walking away from grass. Morveth's coming.
He watched the animals longer than necessary.
When lambs don't walk the line, we meet her. She comes. She comes.
The druid straightened slowly. That's not how Morveth works. The goblin shrugged.
Here's when she poured.
Farther on, fields stretched heavy with grain. The crop stood tall, bent low beneath its own promise, the heads full and ripe. Days, perhaps hours, from harvest. Scythes lay where they had been set down, blades dulled by dew. A cart sat half-filled, its wheel sunk slightly into the soil, abandoned mid-task. The druid knelt, brushed the grain between his fingers. It was warm, alive, recent. They didn't leave long ago, he said quietly. No one answered. The first well stood beside the road, its stone rim thick with creeping vines. Leaves tangled around the pulley, which resisted when the druid tested it. The bucket emerged slowly, groaning, water sloshing within. The surface was clear, but clung to its edge was a greenish film, soft and busy with unseen life. They stared at it. No one drank. The goblin leaned close, sniffed, then recoiled.
Too many tiny mouths in there. Water's busy.
He waved a hand dismissively.
I want it lonely.
The elf frowned at the green film.
That growth is recent.
Everything bad is.
The goblin said.
That's it, sneaky up.
The druid tightened the rope again, slower this time. We'll draw from the river if we must.
River's tired. Was a thinking.
They passed onward. Not every settlement was empty. Some towns still functioned, almost. Smoke rose straight from chimneys. Roads were swept. People moved about their work with measured purpose. Heads down, hands busy. No cries echoed. No bells rang in alarm. At a distance, the places looked whole. Closer, the fractures showed. An orchard left unpicked at its edge. A shrine with offerings gone stale. A well that no one approached anymore, its rope fraying, its stone rim mossed and green. The druid felt it then. Not a single collapse, but many small permissions granted over time. Things set aside, tasks delayed, lines blurred. This didn't happen all at once, he murmured. The goblin snorted.
always bad. Starts small, quiet, like knees going. One day, you wake up, no knees.
He scratched at his arm, hard enough to leave marks, and he cackled a putrid laugh.
People stop fixing little things. Means they're busy hiding big ones.
The elf tilted his head.
What?
The goblin looked up at him, eyes flat.
Who knows? You knows. We knows. Land knows. Just sniff, sniff, and smell with your nose.
The druid and elf glanced at each other with raised eyebrows, and they continued on. Between two towns, where the road narrowed and stone markers rose to define borders rather than welcome travelers, they found the rune. It had once been cleanly cut, its lines precise, its meaning unmistakable. The mark of Tiraket, placed to hold boundaries, to name what could pass and what must not. Now it was changed, not erased, not shattered, redirected. The rune had been chipped, its grooves widened, other lines scored across it. Not wild, not furious, but deliberate. Law bent, permission carved where prohibition once stood. The druid froze. He knew the mark as well as he knew his own name. His hand lifted, hovered a breath away from the stone, then fell back to his side.
This wasn't done in anger,
The elf said softly.
It was done so something could be allowed.
The goblin spat.
Rules broken make room. Room feels.
He kicked dirt against the base of the stone.
Law's supposed to keep things out, not tell them where to stand.
The druid finally looked at him fully. You've seen this before. The goblin bared his teeth in something like a smile.
Seen pieces. Pieces always think they're whole.
They walked on, and the wells returned like a refrain. Each one held water. Each one was neglected. Each one crawled with quiet life where maintenance had failed. They drank from none of them. At the third well, the goblin didn't joke. He stared at the bucket, nostrils flaring.
Don't,
he said flatly when the druid reached for it. The druid paused. You didn't even look.
Didn't need to. Same smell, same think.
By then, his humor had thinned to nothing. He snapped at birds, cursed the wind, muttered to himself in broken phrases and half-remembered complaints.
World's getting sloppy. Too much lying around. Rot goes the lot.
He paused, stared into the distance, then barked.
And don't look at me like that. I'm fine, just tired of stupid places.
Near the end of the day, they found the first town that had been touched by violence. Not destroyed, interrupted. Several buildings smoldered, their frames blackened unevenly. Smoke rose in pockets, thin and uncertain. Crops at the edge of the fields had been trampled and burned, not harvested, not taken. Grain lay scattered and ruined, as though smashed in passing. There were no bodies, no refugees, no signs of organized flight. Food stores had been destroyed, not looted. Doors hung open. Defenses lay unused. Tracks showed confusion. Many feet arriving fast, leaving faster, scattering in all directions.
This wasn't conquest,
the elf said. The goblin wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, though he hadn't eaten.
Orcs don't waste food. Something scared them. Bad.
The druid looked across the burned grain. Or taught them it wasn't safe to take. The goblin grunted.
That's worse.
As dusk settled, the land dipped and the road straightened. Smoke thinned. The signs of neglect eased, not vanished, but ordered. Fields grew more regular. Stones were stacked. Fences mended. And there, in the distance, stood Halvarin, intact, upright, quiet. No smoke rose from it. The druid felt no relief at the sight, only the cold certainty that whatever had begun here had not reached that place yet, and that meant it would. The goblin stared long at the town.
Looks tidy,
he said at last. He didn't joke.
Tidy places don't like surprises.
They did not slow their pace.